We are on today's daf is 74, Ayin Daled. And let's pick up from the bottom of 73b. So we were discussing, the discussion centers around what happens if you have both contradicting testimony and hazama, which is a special rule of testimony that if you claim that the other witnesses couldn't have seen what they saw because they were with you at a different place at the same time, then that is hazama, for which there are separate rules. So we had a brisa, and we're dealing with a dispute of Abaye and Rava. Let's pick up from Amar Abaye, at the very bottom of 73b. Amar Abaye lo. Rava had said that the brisa is talking about three sets of witnesses, right? Where the witnesses were first contradicted and then they were made zomim. He's saying no, the brisa that we're discussing, which has to do with the master putting out both the eye and the tooth of the slave. So he's got to set him free, but which does he pay for? Does he pay for the eye, or for the first incident in which the man was still a slave, or does he even pay for the second incident where he was already subject to freedom because of the first incident? So the Abaye interprets the brisa as follows: "Dapchinhu as minhu." The second set of witnesses says no, it wasn't first the eye and then the tooth. It was first the tooth and then the eye, and also made the first one zomi. Okay, so there were only two sets of witnesses. And if that's the case, then you can't say hakasha tchilas hazama from there, because the first witnesses weren't contradicted before becoming zomi. So there isn't it's not so according to Abaye, our brisa is not a case of hakasha followed by hazama. Mimai, and how do I know? This is Abaye. Now we'll start at 74a. Because the second part of the brisa is talking about reversal of the sequence of events and hazama. In other words, there were only two sets of witnesses. So we're going to say the same about the first part of the brisa. Diktani sefer. What do I know about the end of the brisa? We're giving testimony about a certain person that he knocked out a tooth and blinded his slave. And actually the slave agrees with this. And then the witnesses are found to be zomin. Mishalmin demei ayin l'rav. They pay as zomin. They pay what the master would have had to pay, which is the higher price of blinding someone. So what's going on here? You can't say that they're not saying that there was any injury at all, the latter witnesses, right, who made the first ones zomin. It's not that they're saying that there was no disfiguring here. Because then the first witnesses who became zomin would have to pay the full value of the slave, not just his eye. Because what are they trying to do? They're trying to get him freed, right? They're saying you knocked out his eye, therefore he has to be freed. Therefore you've lost the value of the slave, and now we're found to be zomin. So we would have to pay the full value of the slave, and yet the seifa of the brisa says no, they only have to pay the value of the eye. So what's going on here? Everybody agrees, all the witnesses are all on the same page about the fact that he was disfigured by the master. And the brisa is talking about a case where the second set of witnesses, first of all, they reverse the testimony. So they say, you know what happened first? It was the eye, not the tooth, and therefore so what the first set of witnesses is trying to do is get him to pay the value of the eye, right? And then they said there's only so the second case of brisa is only two witnesses. So Abaye says, so apply that to the first case of the brisa also. So what are we talking about there in the Reisha? If the second witnesses say that that you know what, it didn't happen on Sunday, it happened on Monday. Akase by Demei Eved L'Rav by Shlume. Then the Zomin witnesses, the ones that were found to be Zomin, should still have to pay the full value of the slave. The Chi Mechayev Legavra, because at the time that they testified on behalf of freedom for the slave because he was disfigured. Then the master was not liable to do that, because when do you become liable for a knas, right? For a when do you become? Oh no, in this case, it's like, let's say they wanted to say this happened on Sunday, and so he's free man as of Sunday. But when it turns out by the second witnesses that it happened on Monday, right? Then what they're trying to get him to pay is now not the full value of the slave, but it's the value of how he injured him, the eye, or the tooth. So it must be that the Bryce is talking about where the witnesses give an earlier time to the injuries. And now you're going to say, well, when did the court case take place? Because that's what actually makes you responsible for the value of a knas, right? So if you want to say that he hadn't been yet taken to court for when the witnesses said this occurred, the slave had not yet, or the master had not yet been taken to court to pay the knas by freeing the slave. They should still have to pay the whole value of the slave, because the person that they testified against, he wasn't yet liable for the damages. So it must be that the Bryce is talking about a case where it's already been adjudicated by the court. The court says you have to free the slaves and pay the damages for the second disfigurement. I'm only Ravacha Bereder of Ikal or Rashi. So Ravacha says, Dukya the Rava Mihecha. What is Rava basing himself on? Where he's saying Hachashat Chilas Hazama, that contradicting testimony is the beginning of Hazama. Ilema Meresha, if from the first case, Resha Mikam Miskachshe Mitziyai. According to Rava, there's three sets of witnesses. So the middle set, where they say no, the order was reversed, they're not being contradicted. If it weren't for the fact that they became zomin, sadusa kavasayu kakaima, then their testimony would have stood up in court. Didina kavasayu paskina, we would have decided according to them, because, right, if I say that you're liable for the value of an eye, and you say you're liable for the value of a tooth, right? Well, when I say the value of an eye, that's a higher value that's including, let's assume the value of an eye is $100,000 and a tooth is $10,000. Okay, so when I say that, so I certainly, when I say $100,000, I certainly agree that you owe at least 10,000, right? It's included b'chal mana masayim, b'chal masayim mana, because the smaller amount I'm agreeing to, right? So whose testimony is being contradicted? The first step. And the ones who become zomin, they're never contradicted, right? So you can't say from that. Rashi answers, you're misinterpreting the second case of the Brisa, right? Because he's also going to be consistent. Since he understands the Brisa, the beginning of the Brisa, we're talking about three sets of witnesses. The end is also three sets of witnesses. V'daik miseifa, and he's deducing hakashat chilas adama from the end of the Brisa. Kigon, and how does this work? The Asubei Treviam, right? First set of witnesses comes and says, he first put out his tooth and then his eye. And the court, fines for them. The witnesses, the testimony is accepted. Then another set of witnesses comes. No, it was the other way around. First the eye and then the tooth. The Kamma they are contradicting the first set. And then the first set of aiding becomes zomim. Okay, so then Mishalmin Demei Ayin Larav. Then they pay. What were they trying to do? They were trying to get them to pay the value of the eye. That's what they have to pay to the master as zomim. So then what's the proof? And if you want to say now that being the case, that we don't consider contradiction to be the first stage of hazama. Why should they pay? The testimony is contradicted, right? So you have to say because they're contradicted. That testimony was contradicted, and they were made zomin, and they have to pay. Bava. Okay, that seems to make sense. Bava. Yeah. So what does Bava say? Amalach bishlam areish lo sagid lo shalosh kitos. I understand the Resha, the beginning of the Brisa. There's not three. It's not talking about three sets of eighting. Rather, it's talking about two. Why does that make sense? Sharei Katanya, Rav Omer. The master is happy about this. He admits to this claim. Why would you say in the Seifa? You could say that there are three sets of witnesses. Shari Avid Omer came. Is it you want to say because the slave says admits it? Evad called to whom Amar. Slave doesn't care so much about am I going to get paid for my eye or my tooth. What he really cares about, am I going to be set free? So he doesn't care, if which comes first, the eye or the eye or the tooth. He doesn't care which one he gets compensated for. What he really cares about, either one of those is going to set him free. That's what he cares about. So there's no reason to say that there's three sets of witnesses here, rather, and give try to interpret this according to a third set of witnesses. So you can't say hakasha tchilas hazama because it all happens at the same time. If there are only two sets of witnesses, the second set is testifying both of those things at the same time. Muscular zera ema simas eno. Let's say if so if he's blinded, then he goes free because of the eye. He pilashino, nipuk bashino. If he gets his tooth put out, then he goes out for the tooth. Simas eno v'hi pilashino. If he did both, nepuk be'eno v'shino. Maybe the freedom is acquired by both of those things. In other words, there is no compensation for either of them, right? Maybe since both of them are linked to or a cause for his freedom, neither of them is subject to payment after he is free, right? So the kind of the premise of the whole thing, like he's questioning. Rabbi says lacham arkra, because the Torah says, it says im shein avdo o shein amos oyapil. If you put out the no, sorry, Ushein Avdo or Ein Avdo Hipil. If you put out the tooth of the eye, Lachashu Shalchanu Tachas Shino. So it sums up by saying you put him free for the tooth. Below Tachas Shino Ve'eno. And you would have expected it to say, since it's talking about both an eye and the tooth that you get compensation for, it could have said you get set free for the eye or the tooth, right? But since it says only the one, it indicates that that the freedom is acquired by either one. In this, it's using shame as an example, and the other one is subject to monetary payment to a free person. Anyway, Amar by Ravidi Barazin, Afananayton, we also have our Mishnah. Ganav al Pishanayim, he stole something and there's two witnesses. V'tavav umachar al PM, and the same witnesses say that you also slaughtered or sold the ox. And they turn out to be Edim Zomin. Mishalmin lo sakal. They pay everything. What does everything mean? So means all the knas payments, the kefel and the arba v'chamisha. My love the ha'idu al gneva v'chazru ve'idu al tvicha. So why are we talking about where there's two separate testimonies? First, they say you stole it. Okay, and then they came back and they said, "Oh, and you slaughtered or sold it." He's who's Molag, and they become zomin on the first testimony. And then they became zomin on the second testimony. Since they became edim zomin on the theft, they're like if you didn't steal it, then then you can't have slaughtered or sold it after the sale, right? So on that part of the testimony, they are contradicted, not zomin, right? And then they become zomin on the second part of the testimony. Uktani mechshal mishlakol, they end up paying everything. So it's a case of hakasha followed by hazama. So why would they pay for everything if you don't say if you say hakasha is not the first stage in hazama, then atficha my mishali. Why do they pay the second knas? So Allah showing no hakasha tchilas hazama. Right, but the Gemara says no, not so fast. No, it's like you want to set up the case that way. I could set it up a different way. I could set it up saying that first they became zomin on the second part of the testimony, and so it's not a case of hakasha followed by hazama. Ubi plukta, and like how to understand the case of this brisa is actually the same machlokas as Abaye and Rava. Sorry, no, we're talking about the next case, the next brisa that is also going to be attributed to the opinions of Abaye and Rava. Einim shul chashu, case of witnesses that were first contradicted and then they were made zomin. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar, Chadamar neragin, Chadamar ein neragin. If it's a capital case, so they're arguing about whether Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar are saying, do they get executed? Are they subject to the same capital punishment that they tried to subject the first guy to? And this would seem to be the same debate of Abaye and Rava about hakasha chilas hazama. And by the way, who says what? Maybe Rabbi Lazar is the one that says that you can't give them the punishment because hakasha lav tchilas hazama. Rabbi Lazar enim shu chushu b'nefesh lokin. Rabbi Lazar is also quoted as saying, witnesses that were contradicted in a capital case, they get malchus. If they were contradicted, if their testimony is proving false, not a case of hazama, but their testimony is proven false, then they get lashes for offering false testimony. And if you want to say it's Rabbi Lazar Damar Neragin that says in the first case that they do get a capital punishment for the zomin, am I looking? Why would they get lashes if they're first contradicted? That would be a prohibition for which is like a warning, not like it's the first stage before the death penalty. So in other words, if the testimony had stood, or the more serious punishment here is when they're found to be zomin. Okay, then they're found to be zomin, and they love, and the lashes is just the lav of false testimony, right? So so the lav, the lotasa, the violation which would lead you to the lashes is canceled in the face of the capital punishment that is greater. So you don't get lashes for that if the greater punishment would be death. Ein lokin olam. So it must be Rabbi Lazar says that no, that they're not killed, and because hakasha lav tchilas hazamahi. Tisnayim and the Gemara likes that. Now, just as an aside, lokin, how could you say that they get lashes? Trey traininu. it's 2 against 2. Like in the case where we have two sets of contradicting testimony, like you can't determine which one is right. You just know you can't rely on either of them, but you can't say you're the ones that are lying. You get lashes. Could be the other set that's lying. My answer is yeah, when it becomes obvious. If the murder victim walks into court, right, then it becomes obvious which witnesses are lying, the ones that said he's dead, because here he is alive. So that's when you could theoretically give lashes, depending on how you hold about lav shenitol as far as misa space in this case. Okay, next Mishnah, a little simpler. If you stole, and if there's two witnesses to the theft, but there's only one witness to the tvicha mechira, to the slaughtering or selling, or you admit that you slaughtered and stole it after you've been after it's been testified that you stole it, you admit that you also slaughtered it, for which there's no knas. So you pay the kefel, the fine, the double values, the fine for the theft, but not but the other fine for the 4 and 5 times you don't pay in this case. We've seen this before. If you stole and then you slaughtered it on Shabbos, or the slaughtering was for idolatry, or Ganav Mishal Aviv, or if you stole from your father, Umeis Aviv, and your father died, and then you slaughtered or sold it, and presumably there are other heirs with an interest in it. Or if you stole it and sanctified it, and then you slaughtered it or sold it, again, you're off the hook for the Arbava Chamisha, but you pay the kefal. And we'll discuss this in more detail. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says there's a difference if it's consecrated things which you have responsibility for. In other words, you would have to replace if something happened to it. So, for example, a neder, right, where you say, if one makes himself liable for a donation, a donation sacrifice, and then you pick the sacrifice and then it gets lost or whatever, you still have to come up with you still have the responsibility to replace it. So then for that, then if you slaughter that, you pay 4 or 5 times. But something for which once you've designated it, the particular animal as a korban, if something happens to it, you're off the hook, because you didn't say, I'm going to give a sacrifice, I'm going to give this one, something accidentally happens to it, you have no responsibility for it, then potter, then you slaughter that one, it really belongs to kachim, and so there's no knas. So Gemara says, "Al pi echad pshita." So the first case of the Mishnah is like obvious, right? Like, why would you even think that? Sure, you stole it, and there's witnesses. You're responsible for the kefel payment. But why would you think if there aren't 2 witnesses for the tvicha mechira? Why would you think? Of course, you're not going to pay the 4 or 5 times. I'm right. So they said a kamashmalan al pi atzmo dumyad al pi echad. No, it's telling us that by including both admission and single witness testimony, they're the same. If a second witness comes along and joins the first one and said, yeah, I also saw that, you slaughtered it, he becomes liable for the 4 or 5 times. Same thing. If you make an admission, and then later witnesses come and say that you did it, then the fact that you initially admitted it doesn't help you. You still are made responsible for the 4 or 5 times by the witnesses that come along afterwards. And Rav Huna disputes this. Rav Huna says, no, if you make an admission of a crime and then thereby you don't have to pay the fine, later witnesses come and say, yeah, you did it, you've already been let off the hook, and we don't and you don't have to make good on that. And I think this would be a good place to stop for today. We'll pick it up here tomorrow at ASPEC.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.